All right. Hello and welcome to our sixth webinar on how to become a climate change professional and build a greener future. It's such a pleasure to have such an amazing and diverse mix of professionals working in all kinds of industries. And I know our participants, our members, they all are very interested in climate change, and many of whom want to also become professionals in that field. So I'm sure they'll have a lot of insights learned from this call. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce the panelists. So why don't we start with Lucy and go around, just share a little bit about what your experience has been on taking on climate change in the past few years or so.
Cool. Thank you very much. So my name's Lucy Vesiano. My background is in geography. I did a bachelor's in geography and a master's in remote sensing. So satellite application, Earth imaging, etc. That was actually 20 years ago now. I started my career in consulting, in small satellite consulting companies, and that was basically working with a variety of stakeholders who wanted to sort of use satellite imaging technologies amongst other applications to better manage the environment. So then I did a few sort of stints in a multidiscipline engineering consultancy called Mott MacDonald. Both of these experiences were in the UK where I studied. And there I helped sort of establish, make links between some of the sort of traditional engineering professionals and help them show the potential of Earth imaging to include and have an objective sort of information source to do their jobs. Then I moved to Canada, and after a few more years of consulting, I started with a reforestation-based carbon offsetting project developer called Nature Lab World, where I acted as business development manager. And more recently, I had a short stint as a climate officer at McGill University, helping the university within the sustainable development team undertake a number of actions to reduce the carbon footprint of the university. So I guess I come from different sort of angles there, having seen the potential of space to sort of facilitate and provide objective scientific measurements, and a more sort of down to earth planting trees, and seeing how that helps sort of reduce emissions, and yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
We can't hear you, Mario.
Sorry, I was just saying Scott or Diane, feel free to go.
Go ahead, Diane.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Diane Sachs. Thank you for joining us here tonight or whenever you're listening to the podcast. I am an environmental and energy lawyer. I started in the Ontario government 45 years ago. I was an energy lawyer first and eventually got the opportunity after 10 years to move into the Ministry of Environment and have worked on environmental protection ever since. I had the amazing honor to be the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario from 2015 until 2019 when the Ford government abolished my office. And I am now back to private practice as a lawyer. I am also the deputy leader of the Ontario Green Party and a Green Party candidate for the next provincial election in University Rosedale. And I'm doing that because of my concern about climate change. I have children, I have grandchildren. Climate change is already dramatically affecting the choices that they will have, the kind of world that they're going to live in. And climate change has moved so quickly that even people my age can't be sure of dying on time. So it's the most important issue that there is, I think. If we don't get this right, nothing much else is going to matter. And that's why I'm still working on it.
Thanks, Diane. Shall I go next, Mario? Yeah. So my name's Scott Sinclair. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I've been fighting climate change for most of my career. I've done that in a lot of different ways. My current platform is an engineering B corporation that I founded, and we've built up to 20 different engineering team members. And we go in and we help clients reduce their energy footprint in their buildings. We have a goal of saving 1 million tons of annual carbon from our clients' building portfolios. And that's annual carbon. So every year, every project we do starts adding more incremental savings. In addition to that, I've done a lot of environmental education work. I spent 2 years doing international environmental ed work with Vandana Shiva and Jane Goodall and some other environmental nonprofit organizations. So not a traditional path as an engineer, but certainly one that made me feel really great about my career and inspired me to want to take action in many different ways. And finally, I'll just say I'm on a number of different boards of organizations that help fight climate. And I spent a lot of time on the board of the BC Sustainable Energy Association, and I'm on the Community Energy Association. And so I'm an energy guy.
Nice. Yeah, it's so great to, I mean, I really crafted this panel just to have different perspectives of different career paths, because I think students out there, many of them want to take on climate change. And of course, it will, like Diane mentioned, it will affect the next generation a lot more than our current generations, or past generations, sorry. And I think sometimes it's a little bit difficult in terms of figuring out which kind of careers to start with. But I'd like to know, kind of as the first question, because a lot of our members are students or recent graduates, they're very interested in knowing kind of what are the skills that are needed in each one of your professions. This question comes from Eleanor, so if you could share what are kind of the 2 to 3 main skills that are needed in your field or specifically in your profession.
Who would you like to go first?
Whoever feels most motivated to go first, it's up to you.
Well, I'm happy to start.
Go for it.
Obviously, the skills that are needed depends on not only the profession, but the particular kind of work that you do. There are many different kinds of lawyers. There are many different kinds of engineers. There's a lot of different ways of approaching the climate issue. 3 traits or skills that I think are important for all are, first of all, communication, secondly, empathy, and the third be collaboration. These are all soft skills. They're all related. But if we've learned anything at all about climate, is that it affects everything, and everything affects it. So that's part of why it's a wicked problem. We have to change or fix or repair or improve many different parts of society at the same time. But for that very reason, first of all, there are an almost infinite number of roles that can contribute. It's amazing to me as I interview green business leaders across Canada for my podcast, the Green Economy Heroes podcast, how many different approaches, how many different backgrounds people have in businesses that are reducing our carbon footprint. But wherever you are, I think it's essential to be able to communicate what you're doing and why and how it helps. in straightforward, simple, comprehensible terms with the public, with your customers, with your colleagues, with finance people. And so being able to communicate, I think, is essential in any job. I think it's in order to communicate well, given the polarization and the massive campaign of misinformation that's been conducted over the last few decades, it's really helpful to be able to have empathy for the people with whom you are communicating, some of whom are going to have very different points of view, will have been fed all kinds of lies and misinformation, and may have different fears. So being able to be open and sympathetic and curious about their thoughts, feelings, fears, and opinions can go a long way in making communication possible. And finally, collaboration, because no one person, no one profession is going to be able to solve this. We're going to have to work together, and we're going to have to work together across silos. Anything that could have been fixed within a silo is probably a long way along being fixed. The bigger problems, in my experience, are all across silos. And that means engineers learning to work with teachers, and biologists learning to work with lawyers, and all of us learning to collaborate with as many different people as possible and weave a larger network that together can do more things.
Great stuff, Diane. I'm going to jump in here if that's okay with you, Lucy. So I'm going to build on that. And Diane, I really like what you're saying. Collaboration and communication are some of the most important elements. But I'm going to say that listening is one of the most important skills that I think a lot of people with environmental passion don't have or don't practice. We talk and we tell everybody what our beliefs and agenda are, and we don't listen enough. So I think that's one of the most important things you can nurture. And I'm going to say persistence and patience are also really, really important. It's really, if you look at the election results that we've seen both in Canada and the US, you get a sense that people have different beliefs. We don't all buy into the same ideas, and yet when you're a professional and you're working in industry, you have to work with all these different people from different parts of society. And if you don't listen to them and try and find solutions that work for other people, as well as your own sort of personal path that you might promote, you're not going to be successful. So I always come back to words of wisdom that one of my mentors told me, that sometimes to sink the 8 ball, you have to shoot at the ball beside it. And you might actually get a lot of impact and action occurring indirectly if you can work with people to help them get what they need.
Yeah, well, I definitely had on my list as well the sort of people communication skills, because you can't work on climate change issues as a standalone sort of in your silo. You're going to have to collaborate, and whether you're going to design a building or make policies or sell green products and services, you need to understand your context. You need to understand your target audience, and that's going to be very varied. So as you said, Scott, you need to listen to what people want, what people need, to better understand what needs to be done. The other sort of, I'd say having a sort of basic kind of grounding and understanding in sort of STEM disciplines, science, technology, that's going to help sort of take ownership of the kind of information that you hear, to sort of combat these sort of, stereotypes or whatever false truths that are out there. So you need to sort of be able to understand what information is out there and own it to take action. And I think the third thing, and maybe more from my perspective, I I felt that having a good sort of overall holistic vision of things, and at the same time having a good attention to detail, has been quite important, because a lot of climate change, little actions can be done, whether it's personally or in a professional environment, and all that scales up. So you need to have like the global sort of wider vision, as well as don't sweat the small stuff. And I think when you're looking at a career path, it's not linear. So the stuff that I've done that had nothing to do with climate change, I worked in due diligence, had to pay attention to a lot of detail, didn't seem very relevant to climate change. But then I think it's helped me now, even though I kind of applied it in another sector, if I'm going to be looking at a certain climate action. So I think a combination of these skills can be useful.
Great. Yeah, I agree with all of your points. As Diane kind of mentioned at the beginning, definitely depends on the different careers that you're going to consider. And my video froze there a bit. Anyways, yeah, it really depends, but I really want to kind of emphasize on the empathy and listening. We're gonna go into that a little bit later too, but I think us four right now, and probably a lot of the viewers, we believe climate change exists and we want to make a difference, but how can we really convince others of that? And I think empathy and listening to others to see their viewpoint and understand how can we kind of convince them to what is important to them, whether it's our kids' future or money or whatever. Climate change will probably have an impact on so many industries, so it's definitely important to consider those. With that in mind, the second question we had was is what are the challenges to being a climate change professional, whether it's in your social space or professional space. Of course, a lot of us are maybe surrounded with like-minded people, but what are some of the other challenges that we might face?
Lucy?
I could start if you want. Yeah. I thought of sometimes some people working in sustainability or climate change, there's this sort of guilt, sort of hypocrisy to it. Like you feel like you're preaching how to do things the best way, yet you don't necessarily live this sort of perfect model of sustainability. So that can be sort of something, if you're working in an organization that's really hardcore sustainability, you might feel like it's hard to sort of live up to those expectations sometimes. And I think we have to sort of acknowledge that we're in this sort of complex system, and you have to sort of do your bit to the best of your ability and be tolerant. Yeah, I'd say as well that for some disciplines, we're still in a lot of sort of uncharted territory. Like there's not necessarily the frameworks in place, or there's maybe so many standards, to abide to. So it's kind of the Wild West a little bit. So that can be a little bit unsettling, or it means that, you have to convince people based on, how good you are at sort of, delivering your points across. So I think it's important to be diligent and ethical in how you're gonna, say what you're doing, what kind of climate actions you're doing, because there is a lot of greenwashing out there, and yeah, I think you have to stand up for what, for the cause, really. But it can be quite hard when there's some people are doing one thing and then they're doing something else. So I think that would be like a challenge right now, working in that field.
Diane?
So I wasn't sure, Mario, if you meant by the question, what are the challenges in getting such jobs, or what are the challenges of having such jobs? So it seemed to me that there are, I have a brief comment about both of those.
Sure, go for it.
First of all, for my entire career, there have been more people wanting environmental care jobs than there have been jobs. So jobs that help protect the world, lots of people want or think they want, and there aren't very many of them. It's hard to get paid to be Erin Brockovich. So lots of people, including me, have to do other things. It took me 10 years to get an environmental law job. And if I had known that at the beginning, I might have been so discouraged I gave up, because 10 years is a horrendously long time in your 20s. But actually, looking back, it was a long time ago. So I would say it's true. These jobs are there are more and more of them, but they're hard to get. And if you get them, they aren't necessarily everything that you want. Being an environmental lawyer, most of the time, if you're working for pay, means working for polluters, because they're the people who have the money to pay you. So to find a way to do that work honorably and in a way that does good and not harm can take work, and it isn't always possible. Sometimes you have to walk away. And then keep looking for ways to work with the clients and to make the best you can of whatever opportunity there is. In terms of the biggest challenge of being a climate change professional, I mean, there are many, but for me, the biggest one is the anguish. I don't know if you remember your old Greek myths, but you might have heard of Cassandra. Cassandra refused a sexual advance from one of the male gods, and therefore he cursed her. And the curse was that she would be able to know correctly what was coming, and no one would listen to her. So for the rest of her life, she saw disasters coming, and she screamed and begged people to do something about it, and they laughed at her and ignored her. There's a lot like that to being an outspoken climate activist, or to be a nonpartisan watchdog, as I was, because we know what's coming. It's really well documented. It's heartrending to watch. There's so many things we know we could and should be doing right now that will make life better in so many ways, and it's not what we're doing in order for the short-term benefit of the few. This is really hard to watch. It's really hard to keep watching and keep bearing witness day after day, month after month, year after year. But what's our alternative?
Yeah, well, I think anguish, despair, these are things you feel sometimes as somebody who really cares and wants to make a difference in the world. But I would argue that it also has the other side of it, where you get a deep sense of fulfillment and hope that out of doing the work that you pour your heart into. And so I think one of the challenges is trying to maintain that hope, to maintain that sense of belief that while it's difficult and while one of the most painful parts of this work is that it's slow. Like it takes so long for the changes to happen that you dream of, that you envision. And so that's really, you just have to come back to persistence. And also to know that many people have walked before you. There's so many people who have been building this up to the place that it's actually active the way it is now. And I really believe that there are many challenges. We're dealing in change management. We're trying to convince people to do things that are very different than status quo, and that's just always hard. So you can't expect it to be easy, and you can't give up ever.
Nice. Yeah, and it kind of goes, all your points go back to your skill of patience that you mentioned, Scott. Whether it's patience with yourself or patience with others. And I think it's, if you look at kind of all kind of changes in the world, right? It's always kind of a few, like us four and a lot of the viewers, that want to make a difference. And, you know, as time goes, more and more people believe it. We still have the US where you have people that deny it, but hopefully in Canada it's a little bit better where more people actually say, okay, it exists. I know Greta Thunberg mentioned that was the biggest difference, Europe versus her visit to the US, where it's like in Europe, everyone more or less accepts its reality. And in the US, you still have people who are like, no, it doesn't exist, right? So I think once we get past that point where everyone, like 99% or 100% are really on it, I hope we can, you know, will be easier in terms of job opportunities. With that in mind, going more specifically to Canada, we had Nathan who asked, what impact do you think the new Canadian climate change plan will have on businesses and job opportunities? I believe this happened a month ago. Correct me if I'm mistaken. So yeah, and I don't know which one of you is most closely related to this.
Well, of course, we don't have a lot of the details. And we have the new federal action in the US. We have President Biden's 3 executive orders yesterday, so the federal government here will have to be scrambling to try to catch up a bit. We don't know yet how serious the federal government is going to be, how much money they're going to put into it, how much regulatory muscle they're going to be able to put into making that plan real. But if they get serious about it, we have good evidence that it can mean a lot of excellent careers. The money that the federal government has been putting into supporting the oil and gas industry creates very few jobs. The best estimate I've seen is for $1 million of public money that goes into supporting oil and gas, you get maybe 2.9 jobs. For that same $1 million, you would have something in the order of 10 or 12 or 14 jobs if it goes into regenerative agriculture. You can have even more if it goes into retrofitting buildings to make them more comfortable and less expensive to heat and cool. So we know that investing in the green economy has enormous potential, not least because we spend a huge amount of money importing fossil fuels, which then pollutes our own air and doesn't leave a financial benefit. Certainly in Ontario, we spend between $16 and $25 billion a year roughly importing fossil fuels, and if we reduced our use of fossil fuels, kept that money circulating in the economy, it could mean a lot more jobs and a lot more interesting jobs that will stay here and can't be easily outsourced. There's also the opportunity for lots of innovative small businesses. Canada has a very highly educated and diverse population. We've got excellent universities. We have lots of innovators and inventors. But the problem has been that we don't grow our companies. Canada's famous for having a valley of death where small companies go to die, especially if they have capital-intensive inventions. If we got serious about funding those companies so that they could survive and grow and thrive, it would be really exciting. So people like Talmrand are helping to fill a little bit of that gap. There's a lot more need.
I'll go last.
Okay. Yeah, I think, the sort of the pillars that are presented in the plan, so reducing energy sort of waste and having clean and affordable transport, power, leveraging on Canada's sort of industrial advantage, they're all sort of very, I guess a question mark is going to be, whether the budgets that are sort of presented are going to happen and how. I mean, we've had some good examples with electrification, zero emission vehicle subsidies, etc. I think the real opportunity lies in the SMEs, the small and medium companies that are going to be involved in the sort of retrofitting of homes, etc., to improve energy efficiency. So there's a whole flurry of jobs and skills associated to that, be it at all levels. So I think that's kind of promising. Coming back to what Diane was mentioning with the Canadian workforce, and there is a large sort of STEM workforce, lots of graduates in that field, and that's going to be useful, and it has been, and it will continue to be useful to sort of provide these innovative jobs and businesses that can, in fact, make Canada a good place to have these sort of not groundbreaking, but at least game-changing initiatives to combat climate change. I'm thinking of these direct air capture carbon engineering company in Alberta that you need engineers and big sort of technologies and infrastructure to sort of make that happen. Coming back to a satellite company that was created to monitor methane and greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of good sort of innovative science-based technologies that is made in Canada, which I think the plan is trying to promote and to sort of pursue with that. Whether the government is going to put in the money, or I think private companies are probably already well equipped to sort of go about getting funding for that and being successful. So yeah, and I guess on the other, I think the last sort of emphasis of the plan was another emphasis was this sort of reliance on nature-based solutions. So Trudeau announced his billions of trees to be planted, etc. That's nice, and obviously nature-based solutions. There's evident links to how it can promote health and well-being, etc. But it's not that simple, like planting all these trees. It's not. It takes time, so obviously it has to be done at scale and right now. So whether the next governments will manage to sort of carry on that will be to be seen. But I'll let you close on that, Scott.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, well, I think the impact that it can have is massive. My world is about buildings, and commercial building retrofits is what I do. In Canada, there's 400,000 large commercial buildings. And in one of my projects, typically we'll spend about $2 million on one of those buildings, and we can save 50% or more of the greenhouse gases for that ballpark. And it usually employs 3 or 4 people for one building, and that project takes 2 years. And so it's not full time, but 400,000 times 2 people for 2 years is a lot of jobs and a lot of business and and it's not just my little company that's getting impacted by that. It's all of the suppliers, all of the tradespeople, all of the city workers and the planners and it just goes on and on. And if you look at the final outcomes of the climate change plan and take it out to 2050, we have to transform almost every aspect of our society's infrastructure in 30 years, 40 years. We are going to have different vehicles. We're going to have different transit systems. We are going to have different software systems. It is the Industrial Revolution in a sustainable green form that's coming at us, and it's massive. It's going to change everything. And I guess what gives me hope is that it's not just Canada that is responding to this. Governments around the world are setting goals and implementing action plans that are actually starting to be commitments that people are spending money on. So I'm really excited. I think we're about to ride a great big wave that is going to be amazing.
Thanks for sharing, everyone. Yeah, I would also kind of touch on what Diane said at the beginning. I mean, I don't know much about Canada. I only lived there for a year, but I kind of saw like the Trudeau administration on one hand was like, climate change, we should work on that. Oh, well, support oil companies and build these pipelines. So it's like, okay, what are the priorities of the government? And are we going to say at some point, okay, no more oil, sorry, Alberta, we got to move on? Or are we always going to have oil in the mix? I know in Alberta, at least, it's a huge industry, and at least with the US kind of cutting the pipeline, the question is, are the companies in Alberta going to change too, or what will happen there? So definitely hoping for the best, like Scott said, of let's have a bright outlook and hope that the government really will put climate change as top priority. With that in mind, we'll go to the final question for tonight. So this came from Abdili. We kind of touched on this at the start as well. So how can we convince the general public to care about climate change, especially those people who are still kind of not convinced, or maybe they don't really want to commit to making changes in their lives?
I'm going to start and say I don't think we need to. I think the people who believe that it's real don't need to be convinced, and the people who don't are not likely to come around easily. I think the solutions are a lot easier to implement if you don't even talk about convincing somebody that climate change is something we should care about. But if you say there are incredible job opportunities by implementing electric vehicle charging or solar infrastructure or energy retrofits in buildings, we don't even have to talk about climate change. We're talking about jobs, and we're talking about innovation, and we're talking about embracing change in our world. And I think that's a far more productive conversation than talking about convincing you that climate change is something you should care about.
Yeah, it's
I
true.
have a lot
I think.
of sympathy for. Oh, go ahead, Lucy.
No, I was just going to say something quick that, if you focus on the positives of, combating climate change through, electric vehicles, you're going to get, less air pollution, you're going to be healthier, you're going to be, happier, and ultimately, yes, there's maybe like, a cost premium to start with, but ultimately you're going to be better off financially as well. you're mitigating now, you're doing like climate risk assessments, what's happening, that there's more and more natural disasters and extreme events, etc. It's important to sort of, look at how you can sort of future-proof things now, so that, you're lessening the burden later. So I think, showing the benefits of these changes that we need to do anyway, it's common sense. And, yeah.
Well, thank you, Scott and Lucy. Scott, you're demonstrating again the old saw that engineers are professional optimists and lawyers are pessimists by definition and training and experience. But I do agree with you to a very significant extent that trying to sell the public on climate change is not our major job. Our major job is to build an on-ramp to a better life that also reduces our climate and other pollution. That's been the most successful around the world, is projects and proposals that give people something they can see. Building a large flood protection area that is also a beautiful local park. That's something that people can get behind. But if we do, and to the extent that we do have to convince the public to care, and as a Green Party candidate, obviously I do have to convince the public to care. The three approaches that are most supported by the science I've heard are listening, stories, and the 11 magic words of Ed Maybach, which I'll tell you in a second. What we know for sure does not work is the approach that I'm right and you're an idiot. There's a wonderful book on that. So absolutely, I agree with Scott. As he said earlier, one of the things that we're often not good enough at is listening respectfully to what other people have to say and looking for common ground there. There are lots of stories that we can tell about how climate change is personal, is affecting people, and how solutions are making things better. They don't always, but sometimes they do. And Ed Maybach, who is a wonderful climate communicator, has taught me 11 magic words, and I'm going to encourage you all to memorize them and repeat them often. And it's just simple, clear messages, repeated often by a variety of trusted voices. Simple messages, repeated often by a variety of trusted voices. And one of the key points about that is to be attentive as to who is the right voice. Who do people already trust? Well, that's the person who is best to bring to the conversation. And who do people trust? It depends on the circle, but of all professions, according to the Veracity survey, the profession that's trusted the most in the world, to tell the truth, is nurses. So it's wonderful to see nurses stepping forward to speak up about climate change and environmental catastrophe. And we know that the same people who deny the reality of climate change also tend to be the same people who deny the reality of COVID. So paying attention to people who are already trusted, supporting them, encouraging them, helping them, is better than trying to do it ourselves. We need everyone to come to the table with what they can bring, and we need to make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. That's how Copenhagen became a cycling city. They couldn't afford to keep building road infrastructure, so they built cycling infrastructure. It was much cheaper. And the people in Copenhagen, they weren't convinced to do the right thing. They cycle because it's faster, cheaper, and more convenient than doing anything else. If we can set up our infrastructure so that the right thing is fast, cheap, convenient, and fun, and maybe cool, lots more people will do it.
Great. Yeah, kind of bringing it all together, I think definitely there are people that still are not convinced about making a difference. So as Lucy and Scott and all of you, Diane as well, mentioned, I think it's so important to see like listen to what people care about, right? What is important to them, for sure. Like Lucy said, everyone wants a job, you know. Scott also, I believe, mentioned people like technology, new things like Tesla cars and electric cars. And so when you listen to those people, what they care about, and approach it from that perspective, I think it's so much easier to get them on board, even if they're not like actively activists for climate action. That's okay, as long as they're making small incremental changes in their lives. Eventually, I think if enough people do it, I think we can hopefully have the greener future that we want, and of course also the youth that are listening and our children's can sort of enjoy the world like we're enjoying now. So thanks so much for all of your insights. I hope the viewers out there learned a lot from this. I sure have. And in the Facebook, I've added all your LinkedIn. So in case anyone reaches out, they might have further questions. So for the viewers, feel free to connect on LinkedIn with all these three panelists. And again, Diane, Scott, and Lucy, it was a pleasure to hear all your perspectives, and thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mario, for having us. Scott, Lucy, great to meet you.
Lovely to be
Yes, wonderful. Thanks, Mario. Thanks, Diane, Lucy.